good afternoon, and thank you. Can you hear me? Is this working? Thanks. Thanks for coming here instead of lunch. I know that we'll have lunch a little later. But let me see if I can make it worth your time. I'm going to be telling you a little bit today about preparing for JDK 9. What are the common things that we at Oracle expect will require that you change your code or your processes to be ready for JDK 9. Now, standard disclaimer, I'm talking about something that has not yet been released. These represents our current plans. This is not a promise. As such, plans are subject to change. Given that we put all of the information that we have on OpenJDK, if you want further updates, all you have to do is go and read OpenJDK 9. If anything changes, that's where it will be announced first. So with that in mind, the idea today is to identify the changes in JDK 9 that are most likely to affect most developers, not everybody. Learn about some early access tools that you can use now to get ready for that change, and identify some dependencies. About myself, I'm a director of product management with Oracle. I'm in charge of the Java Standard Edition, part of the product. I've been with Oracle since JDK 10. I'm sorry, since 2010, around the release, typo there. Around the release of JDK 7, that's when I joined. So I've been the PM for JDK 8 and 9. Before that, I worked at Sun Microsystems, also at the Java product management team, but with a different product, not the JDK. And before that, I got an MBA from MIT and a bachelor's degree in systems engineering from Universidad de Lima. Now, JDK 9 has, at least at the time that I took this snapshot, 89 JEPs targeted to JDK 9. So there's a long list. This is just, you're not supposed to read all of those. It's just to illustrate there's a large number of changes. Many improvements in performance, new features, new capabilities. So overall, we think, as usual, it's a worthwhile upgrade. I'm going to ignore most of this. You can always go and read into a lot more detail on OpenJDK 9. There's a page for each one of these guys, which you can spend many fun hours reading. I'm just going to go and talk about the things that I think are going to bite you if you don't pay attention. Now, there's one caveat. Any developer, any change that we do to the JDK is potentially a bug for somebody, right? Even when we fix bugs. As a case in point, back in JDK 1, there was a bug in Java 2D on the font metrics. And it was recognized as a bug, and we fixed it in Java 1.2. As soon as we did, an important customer comes and tells us, you know what, we agree, that was a bug, and this is indeed the correct fix. However, turns out that we have a lot of versions of the program out there that rely on this bug. And we're going to need some time to upgrade all of our users to a new version of the program. So can you help us out, please? There's a flag in JDK 1.2 that re-enables the bug. Okay, so anything could break your code. I'm going to point the important ones. Here's another one. You guys heard that Sun was acquired by Oracle. Now, we announced that we had the intention of changing the vendor properties from Sun to Oracle. Makes sense, right? And who can object to that? Eclipse. They actually read the vendor property to decide which parameters to pass to the JVM. So our answer of why don't you just start a JVM and ask for the properties doesn't work because we needed to know what it was in order to start the JVM. And therefore, if you look at it, there's a text file now in the JDK that has some values that some people use to decide these things ahead of time. So things that we considered, these are not part of the product, people rely on, and they tend to build things around, and when we change them, oh, you broke my code. Weren't you supposed to be backward compatible? And I'm not pointing fingers here. It's even us. us at the JDK team, right, the Java team, we hammer these to people, right? You should code to the specification, not to the implementation. If the specification says one thing and the implementation is doing something different, guess what's going to happen? We're going to correct the implementation to match the specification. So this is an example when we're talking about the order of a map, right? Here, what does it say here? It does not guarantee that the order will remain constant over time. So when you're using a map, and there's a couple of things that use the same key, you cannot rely on the order. This is from the original specification. So we run into a bug on an update of 7, and the bug fix altered what had previously been always the same order. You know, even though we said it's never the same, you cannot rely on it being the same, it always was the same. And we change it. And then we go and do our own testing. Guess who we broke? The JDK. We broke ourselves. So, you know, somewhere in there, somebody in the JDK had coded, and they just tried it, and they noticed, oh, it always returns the same, and they built some programs that, you know, some methods that relied on that. So, as I said, it's us too, so not saying that you do anything wrong, it's just the way everybody develops. We had to delay the version, so we had a 7UX where we actually fixed that thing so that it didn't rely on the order. And then in the 7U next, we had the fix for that particular problem. And you know, I asked a couple of my colleagues for examples, and I got back hundreds of examples. So that's not the point. The point is, with every major release, there are some common concerns. And these are just, you know, they'll happen between 7 and 8, and between 6 and 7. You know, bug fixes, we add new supported algorithms, but more importantly, we don't support some of the old ones, right? New security requirements. We started asking people to sign their code. Code that wasn't signed stopped working, things like that. The important thing for this particular release, though, is what do we expect the incompatibilities to be in JDK 9? By the way, I'm just going to go back on this one and say, here's an important one, use of internal APIs. Take it, everybody, developers here? Who's a developer? Who has consciously used a Sun.API, one of those APIs that you're not supposed to use? Good. Yeah, come on. And if I ask why, I'm sure there's very valid reasons, right? It did what I wanted to do. I wanted to do base 64. There was no base 64 encoder that was default. That's the common answer, right? By the way, how many of you think you have not used one? You have been very careful not to use internal APIs. Therefore, you're not affected by this, right? Do you use any standard library? Log4j, Spring? So let me give you some news. You all use internal APIs, realistically, okay? You're not supposed to use them. That's how we implement the standard APIs. You're supposed to use that. So we were changing them now and then, and people got surprised by that. The other one is, so this is what's going to happen in JDK 9. It's not like there's going to be a couple of changes here and there. We're going to encapsulate all of them. Okay, they're not going to be visible by default. And for the first time, has anybody seen the list of deprecated APIs in the JDK? About how many are they? Anybody? Any idea? We've started deprecating in Java 1.2. How many APIs have we removed after deprecating them for a while? Guess. 0. Nothing yet. So some people have got into the idea that deprecation means, now you give me a warning, but it doesn't really mean anything. With JDK 9, we are removing some things, finally. And by the way, this is the #1 incompatibility that's going to affect each and every person in this room. You may be very diligent in your use of APIs, and you're not using anything deprecated. You're using a third-party library for sure, right? Unless you're doing a trivial Hello World application. Most large third-party providers, they're revamping. They already, they've seen the same JEPs. They know this is coming, and they're coming up with new versions. If you look into Log4j, they'll tell you If you want to play with JDK 9, use version 2. Don't grab version 1 dot anything, right? Because we were using internal APIs, and here's the new refactor version. So at best, you'll have to grab the new version of that API and use that one instead. And hopefully, that's all that you will have to do. Now, for the people that actually write their own codes, I've arbitrarily assigned them into 3 buckets, right? First, the large changes. I expect many developers to be impacted by this. You're going to have to change your code. This is the elephant, right? JEP 260. We're going to encapsulate most internal APIs. Now, this is very carefully worded. Notice that I say encapsulate, meaning they're still there. And I say most, meaning not every single one of them. So when we first drafted this JEP, we said all of them, right? And we did what you'd expect us to do. We went and looked at the open source projects out there. You know, we have access to the same source code that everybody does. And we looked around and we said, OK, let's see who's using internal APIs. And when they're using them, what are they trying to do with it? And any guesstimation of how many non-trivial projects were using internal APIs? 100%. We couldn't find a single non-trivial project that was not using an internal API. Trivia question, what was the most used internal API? Unsafe, somebody, anybody else? Unsafe is the second one. If you plotted it, there's one that's used about twice as much. Then there's unsafe, and then everybody else, there's a long tail. Base 64 encoder, right? As another anecdote, there's a bug on the base 64 encoder in the JDK, the internal one. We introduced a proper base 64 encoder in JDK 8. That's part of the official supported APIs. Use that one. Some customer called, and I mean, there was a bug because we only cared about encrypting certain, about codifying certain characters. And some of the characters that we didn't check for were not encoding correctly. A customer came and said, there's a bug on your implementation of the new base 64. Here's what the old one did. Here's what the new one does. When we pointed out, yeah, the new one is the right one. The old one always had a bug. We got another request of, can you put a flag so that the new one gives me the error that the old one did? Because I really don't, so we've politely declined that one. But, that's to the level of, that's what people expect. In any case, we went and we found a bunch of APIs, and we said, why are they using them? In some cases, like the base 64 one, it's convenience. There's another library, and there's third-party libraries that's been around forever. You could even cut and paste our implementation and put in your code and be outside of internal APIs. Yeah, those were taken away. In other cases, yeah, it was neat, but it's not really needed. But there were a handful of APIs that, yeah, there's really no workaround for those. And yeah, that's a valid use case, unsafe. So what we're trying to do now is everything that was in that category, and it's only a handful of them, we're going to not encapsulate those. They're going to remain where they are. You can just continue to use them. No need to do anything. Now, pay attention to this one. We're not turning them into standards. We're actively working right now on replacements. We came back and said, oh, these are all the use cases that we need those APIs for. There's people at Oracle working today trying to come up with official APIs to replace those use cases. We hope to get it in perhaps 10 or 11, we don't know. But as soon as we do, we're going to deprecate those and try to get them out of the way. Okay? But for the time being, a handful will remain. So this is what I'm saying. Until a major release, I underline this one. Unsafe, can you use it in 9? Yes. Can you be certain it'll be then in 10? No. Okay? No surprises there. We introduced in JDK 8 a tool called JDeps. And it will analyze your bytecode. And I use your loosely because it could be the bytecode from the third-party library that you use. The idea is I don't need the source code. I just need the bytecode. And it'll tell you whether or not your classes are using internal APIs. Okay? Now, that was introduced in JDK 8. JDeps, pretty nifty tool. I would recommend that you use instead the JDeps version available in the early access of JDK 9. Simply because when we find an internal API, we don't just tell you, well, good luck. When we can, as I said, we know in some cases you should be using this instead. The tool will tell you, right? You're using Sun Microsystems, base64 encoder. Use the official one. Here's the API. The one in JDK 9 has better recommendations. So that's the only big difference. Okay. This is the first tool, by the way, that I know of that we've done that just proactively helps you move to the next version. Everything else was to do about today. We've also introduced something called multi-release jars that may help you offset. Some of the issues that we have is, people tell us, yeah, I'd like to use this new API, but some of my users, I'm going to just create this jar file, and some of my users are going to run it on 9, some people are going to run it on 8. I need this thing to be compatible with both, therefore I'm restricted to whatever the oldest user is using, right? With JDK 9, we've introduced the option of, in the same jar file, you can create classes and say, if you're running JDK 8 and below, use these classes, A, B, C. If you're running JDK 9, replace A with this other, more advanced version of A that uses JDK 9 APIs in an effort to simplify your management, and that way you can have a single jar that can be used across releases. So for anything that I'm listing here, by the way, high-level overview, search engines are your friends. That's why I put JEP numbers. I'm not that anal. It's just that it'll make your searching so much simple. Search for JEP 238. You'll learn all about it you need to know about the multi-release jars. Okay, same with JEP 260. Another one, this is one of my personal favorites, a new version string scheme. Anybody, every single version of Java released from Java 1 to now, if I type java.-version, what are the first 2 characters? 1 dot. Why aren't we in Java 8? Where's that 1 dot coming from, right? You can go and read all about it, about why we kept Java 1, et cetera, et cetera. Also, which version has more features? 8 update 40 or 8 update 45? They both have the exact same features. 45 is a bug fix. 40 was a new update with new features. In JDK 8, the multiples of 20 introduce new features, so 8 update 20 and 8 update 40, and then multiples of 5 or 6. It's very convoluted, and that's because we're using one number to mean many things. So we have a little secret decoder ring that you can look in OTN, and you can think, there's a series of logical decisions that led to a very convoluted string. That's not going to happen with JDK 9, okay? JDK 9, the version string is 9. And it's not actually semantic versioning, but it's much closer to it. So you will have a couple of digits that will rev independently, and they mean different things. So most people don't care. Trust me, when we were looking at that code, there were a lot of places where they say, let's find out the version number. Read the version number. Truncate the first 2 things. Compare the rest. That's not going to work on 9, okay? There's some APIs, by the way, so if you want to compare things, you don't have to just do strings and compare it. So a bunch of new APIs. That also means, by the way, all the file names for the binaries are changing. Okay, so don't expect to get 8U45. So if any of you have some sort of build system that automatically grabs versions and computes the file name and uses that in your testing, you'll have to reword it. And the good news, this is not retroactive. We're not going to rename and renumber 8 and 7, right? So for a while, you're going to have to deal with, if version 8 are above, below, do this. If version 9 and above, use new version. Similarly, the whole point, well, I don't know about the whole point, but one of the important sales points of modularity in Jigsaw, remember that monolithic rt.jar, the runtime jar? Yeah, that's not there anymore. So it's not only the rt.jar, but the file structure inside of the JDK. If you look at things like the registry keys, all of those things have been revamped. We think it makes more sense for, hopefully, most users don't care about this, but we have seen people that go and inspect the directory and try to assume things based on whether they find a file there or not. Okay? We all kind of think, yeah, that's silly, but trust me, there's a lot of people out there doing that, and they're going to run into troubles with 9. And those are all the large changes. I don't expect the next ones to affect as many people. Now, these ones are medium changes. Less likely to be used, but they're gone in 9. Okay? So this is everything that we're removing or that we're no longer shipping with. There were a bunch of garbage collection combinations that were deprecated in JDK 8. Now, that means that we have not been testing them. And if you are a support customer and come and say, I have a support ticket and I would like to help with these, we will tell you, you will have to use something else. Those are unsupported. But they remained in JDK 8, right? They were still available. Who knows? Maybe they work. In JDK 9, they're gone. Okay? Now, there's a bunch of flag combinations. And here are all of the ones that as of the time of when I did this slide. I've also, in case you like pretty pictures, everything that's in red here was deprecated in JDK 8. Apologies if it's not very clear. It's all centered around these guys here. And you will notice that all of the lines that led to incremental CMS are deprecated. So if there's no way of getting to incremental CMS, guess what else is getting removed? Incremental CMS. Okay? Now, as a rule of thumb, if you were trying to use one of those combinations in JDK 8, you were getting a warning like that. Okay, well, that's another warning. In any case, whenever you pass a command, that one is about the permgen size. We remove that on JDK 8, but there's a lot of people that have in their scripts, I'm going to set the permgen. Whenever you set that, we put a little warning. The way we operate is we will warn you in one release, and we will remove it in the next one, which means that for anybody that's not looking at the returns, oh my God, it broke on 9 without any warning, right? So give us a little credit. We put it there. Please read it. And we've already had situations like these with things that were deprecated on 7, removed on 8. People complain about, you never told me, except for 2 years. So here's another one, right? As I said, those were removed. Here's another one, the perm generation. It was giving you warnings on 8. It's just going to tell you, I don't know what you're saying, and blow up on 9. Okay? This one in particular, permgen, yeah, that's going to bite a bunch of people. Easy fix. Remove that command line, right? How many people think that's an easy fix, by the way? How many people work in very large companies where changing a command line, it means you've got 27,000 environment replications and there's no single instance? Yeah. There are a few APIs that we couldn't actually come up with a rational modularization. We created these loops. If we try to maintain them, there was some references that really didn't belong. And there was no way of creating rational modules if we kept these guys. So these guys are gone. Now, again, I don't expect anybody to be using them, but somebody else will. So a couple of properties, login manager and util, change listener. They will just have complicated jigsaw modules, to be an absurd. We have several tools for selecting which JRE to run an application with. Some of them are well used. This one, we cannot find many people that are using it, and it usually takes a lot more than this. For most people, it's just a matter of if you need to use a particular JRE, you bundle the application with that JRE, and you just launch it from right there, and then you're set, right? So this mechanism, which was there for a while, since JDK 5, now it's gone. Now, you could use these either via the command line or through a manifest. We're going to treat it differently. If you're giving it to me in the command line, I'm going to stop you, because I assume you have control of the command line. If you're passing it via the manifest, I'm just going to give you, like a warning, and I'm going to ignore it, because for all I know, you have that's built into some third-party library, and you don't have the source code anyway, so maybe you cannot change the manifest. Anybody use the Endorsed standard override and extension mechanisms? Not a single person. Good, we can skip that. So we're, if you know of somebody that's using it, this creates the same kind of problems that we're trying to solve with Jigsaw. We have a better solution, Jigsaw. If you need to use some API, some new standards, you can just put them in the class path instead of putting them here in the endorsed or ext directories. Now here's another nifty trick. Those two directories here, Java home libext and Java hub lib endorsed, they are gone. If you want to crash the JVM, all you have to do is create them again. And we will check, well, it's not going to crash the JVM, but it's going to check and it's going to say, you're trying to use this, I'm just going to halt you right there. So, some people that were using this didn't read this. Oh, they forgot about it. Let me create the directory and put my jars in there. Oh, it's erroring out. This is why. There's a couple of packages, as I said, all the internal APIs, and most of them you can tell because they have Sun in the name, and they're not part of the Java doc. There's a couple that don't have Sun in the name, but they were still meant to be internal, and those are also hidden. When I say hidden, by the way, it means that you can pass a command line and expose them again. Now, trivia question, is that a good idea? Good. That's a good idea if you were not in this session and this blows up in your face and you need a month or two to do your change. Then pass the command line, use that month, do the change, and then get rid of the command line. Okay, that's not a permanent solution, please. We've removed some tools. So we've got a bunch of tools and APIs, and this is pretty much a common thread, right? Demonstration code, somebody thought it would be useful, and it really should have always been kind of separate, but hey, it's there, why not just include it? It gets to be very bulky, and it's not clear when you have how long are you going to support the JDK? We don't support those experimental tools, so we're moving towards a trend where we're getting those out of the JDK. Everybody, if you really like them, the source code remains available. Knock yourself out. We have other tools that provide the same functionality. And in that vein, remove JHat, right? Same idea. Experimental, unsupported, out of date. When you see all of those things, it's a good candidate for removal in a future version. And we have better analyzers. The entire HTTP proxying mechanism of RMI has been deprecated in Java SE 8 and will be removed in JDK 9. Again, if you're using these, you're getting warnings. We mean it with the warnings this time, as opposed to the previous versions. Sorry. This one is a little embarrassing. Never worked properly, so if you were using it, I don't know what you were getting. This is an inherently unsafe method, thread stop. Now there's a flavor of it that has throwable. It's been deprecated for a long time, and it will now throw an exception. There's another one, thread stop without any argument. That remains. It's also inherently unsafe, but remember when I said that we go and look into the code and to decide how much impact one of these changes will have? Yeah, removing that one would have been too painful. There would be too many projects affected. So don't use it, but if you're using the throwable one, yeah, that one is going to stop working. Serialized applets functionality. Do I really need to explain this one? There's serialization, there's applets. People ask me, hey, can Oracle support applets for a little longer? Yeah, sure, we can. Doesn't mean they will work because the browsers won't. So, if it makes you feel better, assume we will support them forever. They'll stop working, next year anyways. But non-strict JNLP parsing. So if you're using JNLP, in some cases, when it was not perfectly written, we gave it our best shot as to what we thought you meant. And all developers can tell you that's probably not a good idea. If you're not being clear, I should just error out and ask you to be clear. So that's what we're going to do now, okay? What you use, for example, to do a web start application, that little file that tells how you're going to launch it and which parameters to pass and which jars, et cetera. So we were trying to be friendly, and we realized that's not usually what you want when you're trying to specify how you're going to do something. This one is the good and the bad, right? Who produced the JDK for Macs until JDK 6? Apple. What about JDK 7 and above? Oracle. Thank you. What Apple did was it grabbed the same source code, but it also added their own APIs to do things that weren't available elsewhere. So COM Apple, EAWT, COM Apple, EIO. There were to offer, like the little bouncy thing in the Mac and stuff like that. Standard for Apple, not a standard elsewhere. So whatever we could think of that was, yeah, there's a decent translation for these that would match, say, Windows and Linux. We created some new platform-independent alternatives for those in Java AWT. And the ones in Apple are going away. So once again, if you look into our little tools, they'll tell you, yeah, don't use the Apple ones, right? And in some cases, they'll tell you, if you're using this one, here's the new and enriched AWT one. And as a side benefit, there were some things that were added into Windows and Linux because, they made sense. So the good and the bad on that one. There is a COM/SUN image codec, JPEG. We have had this replacement available since 2002. It's not in OpenJDK, so licensing and all of that good stuff. It's been deprecated in JDK 7. It's gone on 9. Now, this one, I hope nobody's bothered by this. We've changed the garbage collection login. There's a new JEP that uses a unified framework for this. So I don't think it's going to be a big deal, but if you were parsing the logs and you expected them in a particular format, you'll just have to, the information is still there. It's just standard now for all garbage collection. Okay, so hopefully it'll just be a matter of, if you have some parser automator thing, you'll just recode that and it'll work just fine. There were some garbage collection login flags that are now removed. Okay, so the most common flags that we wanted to deprecate, we went and looked around, and we said, yeah, these are pretty common. So here, let me remap them for you. So XX print GC will be mapped to xlog GC, print GC details, xlog GC, blah, blah, blah. There's another list of 43 more that were not that common, and we didn't bother remapping those. You can do that on your own. So if you're affected by those. Okay. That's it for what I think are the changes that may require to do. Then there's the ones that I call the annoyance section. Easy workaround, right? This is not going to be a big deal. This is, don't call me to it if you do have a big deal with this one. But we're changing the default garbage collector. So for the platforms that supported, that is not every single platform, G1 is now the default garbage collector. Now, anybody cares about which garbage collection their application uses? Okay. Now, of those of you with the hand up, which one of you are assuming it's the default rather than passing it as a parameter to use the one that you care for? You're impacted, right? You just have to now go and say, well, I want the other one, unless, right, you were. So if you were just relying on the default, you can, toggle back and use the previous default. So that's why I said not a big deal. Here's another one, another tool that no longer ships with the JDK. Visual VM. Okay, it's a profiling tool, was bundled with 6, 7, and 8, and it remains available for downloading GitHub. So if you were using this tool, by all means, well, try some of the other tools, but if you like this one better, there it is in GitHub, go for it. Likewise, JavaDB. This is just another name for Apache Derby. It's the exact same database. It's shipped with the JDK with just JDK 7 and 8, so it's recent addition. And we realize, yeah, most of you have access to the internet, right? You can all search Derby, you can find it, and you will get a more current version. We don't have to then deal with what happens if they update, and we don't have an update coming, right? Just get it directly from the source. Finally, we're going to deprecate a bunch of things in JDK 9 in preparation to get them out in a future version. So if you're using any of these, well, applets, if you're using applets, if you're using some codec, if you're using jar, you can jar the same thing twice. CMS, jar signer, you have a policy tool, a bunch of security APIs that are no longer current. So these are the things that have already been broken and are disabled by default, right? We're deprecating JConsole and the Doglet API. These will remain available in JDK 9. They will continue to work. If you happen to be a customer, they are supported, so you can file a support ticket against them. They're just being marked as deprecated with views of removing it in a future version. You have a question? I'll have to go and click on the JEP. So if you want to stay a little later, as I said, search engine your help. I'll find it for you in a second. But it's just a bunch of common DOM APIs. Not all of them, just some of them. Okay? JDeps. The question was, is the tool that I mentioned going to detect all of these? And no, it's not going to detect deprecated APIs. JDeps looks for the dependencies for the modules. So wouldn't you wish that there was a tool that found deprecated APIs? There's a tool called Deprecated, which is a different tool. The second tool in the toolbox that will just help you find stuff in the future. You can use JDeprecated to simply list all of the deprecated APIs. You can say, just tell me the deprecated APIs that have been deprecated in this version, or tell me the ones that are deprecated for removal. I didn't include it because that's an improvement, but another improvement that we have in JDK 9 is when we deprecate something, what do we mean with deprecation? Because we've used deprecation for at least 3 different reasons, right? We don't like the style of these. There is in an AWT show and hide for a form, right? And in Java, that's not really what we do. We use set visible true and set visible false. It's the same thing. So it's a style thing, right? It was deprecated because we thought you should be using set visible, but we're never going to remove it. To the point that JDK 9, that show and hide are no longer deprecated. We have undeprecated those APIs. We have deprecated them. So they were tagged as deprecated. They are no longer deprecated, right? There are other instances where we're really saying, yeah, we're not working on that particular API anymore. Have you noticed that there's a package called new IO? NIO? Yeah, there's a package called IO. Where do you think our efforts are? New or the old IO? Right? So it's mostly yeah, we think you should be using, if you're coding something from scratch, you shouldn't be using that old API. But if you have some old product that is working fine, and you're not recoding, there's no rush to go and refactor and get that out, right? And there's finally deprecated for, yeah, this is going away. You should get rid of it. And if we tag them all as deprecated, which one is which? So there's enhanced deprecation in JDK 9. We've added an annotation. It tells you, the important one is you can look for things that have for removal equals true. Okay? Now, it doesn't mean that we've gone and tagged everything for removal true or for removal false. So it's the presence of for removal true that should bother you. For removal true means we intend to remove this API in the next major version. Again, careful with the wording. If something doesn't have for removal true, it doesn't mean that it's going to stay there forever. It means that we have no plans for removing it in the next major version. There is the possibility that the next version, major version adds a for removal true to something that currently just has, doesn't have for removal. You had a question. Did I answer it already, or? Yeah, so the question is, are these the two tools that I'm going to use from JDK 8 to JDK 9? And the answer is these are two of the tools that you will use. As I mentioned, we already include a bunch of warnings and messages in just when you just run Java in the command line, right? JDK 9, as the point of this talk is, will be a little more painful. By the way, I'm just going to skip to the prepare for the future now. That's the use JSDep. I should add another line about use JDep, right? It's going to be a little bit more painful than other major versions. And part of my job at Oracle is to go and tell other Oracle groups about these things. This presentation, I've been doing, this is like versions 13. There are earlier versions that were given to Oracle teams. And from their feedback, we came up with, yeah, we don't just need warnings, we need little tools that will help us do this into the future. And that's where these tools come from, right? We realized that not all users come to Devoxx or to Java 1 or just having it in a session in some conference, it's not enough. So if you can think of other tools that would be useful to help you migrate, let me know. Right? Bring them up. We will try it. And the important thing is JDK 9 early access have been available for a long time now. We've already reached feature complete. So if you were waiting and holding off and saying, oh, it's still a little shaky, I don't want to try it yet, there's no new features coming in. You should try it now. This is like planning for retirement. If you wait until you have to do it, if you're about to retire and you start saving, it's not going to be enough time. Right? Let me tell you what's going to happen. After all of these tools, there's people that are going to be surprised when they try to go to JDK 9, right? And they're going to find about it when they have a deadline for, oh, we need to go to JDK 9 in 3 months. And then it's a little too short. There's going to be people that are going to wait until JDK 8 reaches end of public life. And I know we're going to get emails saying, can you extend the public life of 8 for a couple of years so that we can move to 9? And we didn't start early. Download it now. You don't have to type any URLs, just any search engine. JDK 9 early access. The first hit is likely to be that one. You will find, you see that 9 build 120, that's fairly old. We're what, in 150 something, if not 60 something already. We rev it about every, if not every week, every other week? Every other week. There are already out there IDEs in early access mode. This is NetBeans, but I'm sure you can find your favorite flavor of IDEs with support for JDK 9 features. So this is NetBeans showing you, like a module graph for one of your applications. Like us, they're waiting for your feedback. If you tell us about something that it's going to bite you and that we could help you with, if you tell us now, it's a little late, but we might be able to help you. If you wait until a month before GA, we'll tell you, well, isn't that a great idea for 9.1? Okay? Same for the IDEs. They want your feedback, by all means. This is what the Java dependency tool looks like, right? A couple of caveats, of course. If you're using reflection and there's some text that calls a class, we will not know about that until runtime. So, this is as good as we can do without magically knowing what you're doing. And there's a public wiki over here where we show you, this is where we add more of the, if you're using this, you should be using this other one instead, okay? So it'll go and update. I ran it against TC Updater. I don't know if you've seen that tool to update the time zone. And it found that it was using a bunch of classes, com.sam.tools. And hey, you should be using Java util instead, okay? If you do run these JDeps and it finds a bunch of stuff, for most APIs, this is the, yes, add exports. I updated this slide. I think it had it for a while. There is a command line that tells you add exports. This is the module. This is the API. And I want to export the visibility that was hidden to all unnamed modules. So your classes, if they're not modularized, they're automatically collected into a module called unnamed, right? If you use modules, you would put the name of your module instead. But you get the gist, right? And notice that this is slightly long. You have to do it not quite for every API, but for every class, right? And no, we're not going to try to make this any easier because the whole point is that you don't do this. And hopefully you haven't seen anything that has scared you too bad, but yeah, and that you found this useful. Any questions about preparing for JDK 9? That's a well-chosen adjective. Sure.
I did see something else that immediately struck me as exactly backwards from what should be happening. We're deprecating Class A in favor of Class B, where Class B is a broken one. Who do I talk to about that?
Okay. So I think everybody heard that question, right? He doesn't have a microphone, and I heard him fine. Well, good. Oh, sure, for the recording. So the question is, he thinks he's found a case on which we're deprecating something in favor of a new class, and the new class is broken. Who do I contact about that? Now, for every single one of these classes, there is a JEP, right? There's a JEP, Java Enhancement Process number in there. If you, I haven't set up my computer for the internet, but if you just search for JEP and that number, you will end up in a page that explains what's going on, why we're doing it. It tells you who the lead is, and more interesting, it has a discussions, and it has an alias. That's the mailing list where the people that are coming up with these discussions are working on that one. So I would recommend, don't just write there, go read the archive, because I don't want to sound condescending, but chances are somebody else has spotted that before, and nobody likes to reply to an email that's already in the archive. Correct. So I'm not going to be so foolish as to say, oh, there are no mistakes. I've certainly heard a lot of objections that if you go on and look into the aliases, there's a long discussion, and maybe there's not even consensus, but at least you understand why the decision was made. But if there is a mistake, we really, really, really want to hear about it today. Okay, so go bring it up, and if you do not find the alias, you can find my name at this session. Just ping me and I'll route it directly.